Thank you, Joe. It is an honor to be here. So thanks for having me. And the beauty of this is I'm just a setup guy. I don't have to have any expertise. I've got the backups for that. So, all right. All right, so there's a picture of me off to the left. All right, crisis of manhood. When you start to look at this, there is so much literature everywhere. You could really get lost in it, and it really would be kind of hard to focus. So just a few questions I posed up there that I think are somewhat relevant is this a new phenomenon? Is it distinctly American? And is this a pushback on the male sex or the male gender? And just real quickly, in case you need to leave early, the answers are no, no, and both. So I'm going to let you look at this in terms of, so what do men want? A reading list for the male identity crisis. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can see feminist accusation. Men are defective, brutal, competitive, exploitative, insensitive, disconnected from meaningful social relationships, out of touch with their feelings, oblivious to things they do not want to hear. Why not simply replace the unit? It's kind of brutal, but does this sound like what you might hear in some places, like maybe my old employer or some places like that? So then over to the right. In a postmodern world lacking clear-cut borders and distinctions, it's become hard to know what it means to be a man and even harder to feel good about being one. So I think some of us here might feel like this is the crisis and this is the contemporary view. You might be surprised, though, if I tell you that this came from the New York Times in 1994. So is this a new phenomenon? No. Now, I'm even going to go back further. So here's a letter to the College of William and Mary from the collected chiefs of the Indian nations in 1744. So the backdrop of this is that the head of the Indian nations was talking to people from College of William and Mary, because College of William and Mary had agreed to take some of the Indians, and they said, we're going to educate you at our college in our ways, and we're going to make you educated, better people. And so you can see in bold what they've said. Several of our young people were formerly brought up at the colleges, and they were instructed in all your sciences, but when they came back to us, they were bad runners, ignorant of every means of living in the woods, unable to bear either cold or hunger, knew neither how to build a cabin, take a deer, or kill an enemy, spoke our language imperfectly, were therefore neither fit for hunters, warriors, nor counselors. They were totally good for nothing. Now, as an act of charity, though, they offered to take some of the people from the College of William and Mary, right? And they said, send us a dozen of your sons. We will take care of their education, instruct them in all we know, and make men of them. All right? So what is a man? It may depend upon what you need a man for, and it may depend on your culture. So where's the heart of young men in 2026? Okay, where your treasure is, there your heart is. Or as Father Mike Schmitz has said, behavior is a language. So I'm going to talk about pornography first. This is obviously a slave to our most base instincts. And there's nothing that's new about the crisis in manhood that has created this interest in pornography for the most part. I think for the most part, the interest in pornography has always been there. It's just that it is so much easier now. Now, I give some people at Franciscan some credit for putting this study together. I want to give this slide a little bit of context because I realized after I'd submitted it to Joe, it's a little misleading. So the results of the study were that 56% of the students at Franciscan had consumed pornography. So that's not on the slide. So 56%, that correlates to the bottom row of the table, use outside of Franciscan. So in their paper where they publish this, they look at what the use is at other colleges. So you can see it's a decent range, and Franciscan would be kind of in the middle of that. You would have maybe hoped better for a Catholic college, but we're all sinners, right? And we're all human. So now of those who use pornography, 87.6% of the men were using it weekly. So this is not casual usage. And women, 40%. And also look, because I think this is a high school. We think about high school and college. Look at the age at which the first exposure was, between 9 and 13. And for many of them, the first exposure was unintentional. But for almost 70% of the males, it was intentional, between the ages of 9 and 13. And even with the intent to stop, over half the men were unable. Okay? All right, now I'm going to talk about the manosphere, which is, I don't know, everybody here might have a different idea of what the manosphere is. But I think there's a theme here. So I've often said that it's better to run toward rather than away. What I mean by that is if there's an explosion, you don't want to be near it. Where you go is going to be directionless. You just don't want to be where you are. But it's not a strategic decision to end at a certain place. It's just you don't want to be there. Whereas if you're running toward, you're making a conscious decision about where you're going and what you want. So then you're moving towards that. Well, in the manosphere, I think what's happening is we're seeing men run away. And what they're running away from is a toxic view of manhood. And a view of manhood that's making, or a view of men that's making them feel like they can't win, like there is no way for us to succeed. So Ross Douthat, who's a Catholic commentator and author for the New York Times, wrote about the far right. And what he was saying is that what is driving men, specifically young men, to the far right is this idea that the world is stacked against them and there's really nothing they can do to succeed. He mentions this gentleman, Nick Fuentes there. I don't know how many people know that name. Marcus Peter, who's going to be here later, actually wrote an article about him. He has a weird name for his followers. They're called Groypers, and I'm not sure where that name came from. But there was a study that said, Rod Dreyer, who wrote the Benedict option, said that over half of the young Republican staffers in D.C. would consider themselves Groypers. So Nick Fuentes has been very anti-Semitic, and in an interview, he even said Stalin was one of his heroes. Right? So these are not Catholic ideals that he's espousing, but there is a big attraction to him because he's making his version of manhood attractive to people who feel like there is no other way. So if you feel like the door has been slammed in your face before you ever reach it, if you're feeling alienated, you're going to run away from that. I don't think people would strategically run toward people like Nick Fuentes, but they're running away from a world that doesn't seem to be for them. Next, Looksmaxer. How many people have heard of this? Just curious. Decent number. All right, so the idea here is, and some of this overlaps with a group called incels, involuntary celibates. These are people who feel like they don't have any chance to be able to date, to find a mate or a partner, and once again, the world is stacked against them. So what is the superficial way to be able to overcome that? It's to maximize your looks. This is not all new. However, it is taking it to a whole new extreme when you look at all of the things that this gentleman, whose name is clavicular, because of the distance between his clavicles, has put together. Now, you might say this is some esoteric thing that nobody's ever heard of. So this is clavicular. He makes more than $100,000 a month on his channel. And you can see at the bottom, videos are become so ubiquitous on X that its head of product recently threatened jokingly to shut it down if he saw one more site. So this is not a fringe group. There are a lot of men who are flocking to this idea that what really makes you a man is how you look, because that's how you're going to be successful. And then maybe the worst example of this is the Tate brothers, and I don't know how many people know about the Tate brothers, but it's particularly egregious what they have done in basically trafficking young, well, I want to be careful not to say anything that would get me in trouble, but accused of trafficking women and then having them perform in pornography and videotaping them during that. So they were actually at one point in Romania and weren't even going to be able to leave. They then recently got permission to leave. There's still a lot of lawsuits against them. But I think the key thing from this, this message here on the left, you can see this was from a student at an all-boys Catholic high school in Chicago, and I think he summed it up. At a time when many of us have too many questions about what it means to be a man, the Tates offer answers that are appealingly simple. If we follow their sexist, racist lead, they promise we'll be alphas too. Okay, once again, I don't think anybody strategically would say that's for me, but if you're running away from a world that seems like you can't win, that's where people end up. Gambling. Before we decided to make this conference on the crisis of manhood, we were talking about gambling. And I see patients in my office all the time, and I'll ask young men if they gamble, and I get one of two responses, either yes or kind of a snicker like, I'm either not going to tell you, or maybe I don't, but everybody I know does. According to this Pew Center study, it was 21% of men and 16% of women under the age of 30, which may not seem like that many. In fact, I would have thought it was higher. However, it did triple since 3 years ago. In this Farley Dickinson poll, it was a quarter of men under 30, so even a higher number, and 10% are problem gamblers. And then if you look at this study, this looks at the economic consequences of betting and what happens to communities and states that have betting allowed in terms of things like bankruptcy and foreclosures and bad credit scores, etc. And then if you want to get more sophisticated, you don't want to be a degenerate gambler, but you still want to take the risks. Well, then you get into the prediction markets, right? So the prediction markets are basically kind of more sophisticated gambling. So I put at the bottom, you can actually wager on the second coming of Christ, which makes me think if you win that bet, what do you do with, anyway. So, but you can also see from the second bullet how much money is being channeled through there. If you want to hit the link, and if you go to, there's two of these mainly, Polymarket and Cashly, so you can see all of the things you can wager on. Will the Seattle Seahawks visit the White House in 2026? There was a story of a man who made six figures. He put a wager on whether we would go into Venezuela and capture Maduro. And about 3 or 4 days before it happened, he placed a wager and he made six figures. Probably had some inside information, but made six figures. And then there are people who wager on things like, are we going to go to war with Iran? And then the question is our current involvement a war or is it something else? But this is where a lot of people are starting to get involved. It seems more like, to some people it seems more like the stock market than it does gambling, but still where a lot of people are ending up. Not going to spend a lot of time on this. Marijuana, very heavily used, men more than women. Still, this says about a third. My experience from medicine is it's actually higher than that. And then AI, we talked about this last year, but one of the concerns about AI is that there's going to be considerable workforce displacement, that jobs aren't going to be there. So if you're a young man who's been thinking my identity is going to be tied up in raising a family and having a job and supporting my family, and now those jobs aren't there, what is your identity? And I think it has to be formed in other aspects of what we are, what we do, how we pray, how we communicate with other people, how we serve. We don't really know what the workforce is going to be like in the future, but we do have to realize that there could be significant job displacement. And I think that will be a big struggle for men as well. So what is a man? This is a result of a survey from Gabriel Richard High School. So Joe circulated this survey, and you can see more women than men answered. View yourself as masculine. Maybe lower than I might have hoped it was, 3.75 out of 5. Masculine role models, women were a little bit lower than men. The next two rows, really there's a lot of consistency, even if things are not in exactly the same order. And these were just the top five out of a list of about 30 or 20 different items. So top 5 influences, first of all, they're the same. But I also think those are what you might hope they would be, right? That your own father, that your faith, other family members, teachers, coaches, friends, fathers, that those would be the good examples. So I thought that was very encouraging. The attributes that make a man masculine, once again, same things, basically different orders, but these are all admirable things that you would want. Now, top 5 activities expected of a man. For the men, once again, I think these are pretty admirable. Interesting that for the women, 2 of the items are playing sports and watching sports. So I think the guys were just maybe afraid to say that, but it probably is, there's probably some truth to that. All right, so what is a man? Let me talk first about the feminized versus the libertine versus the Christian. I think certainly in some environments, there is a desire to emasculate men or to feminize them, to take all of the characteristics of, quote, toxic masculinity and get rid of all of that and feminize man. That certainly is not our church view of what it means to be a man. But neither is the libertine view, this idea that you simply indulge, that sexual promiscuity, that you take advantage of women, that whatever you want is yours. That is also not the Christian view. So the Christian view is certainly different. So we're going to go through a few examples of what it means to be a man. First, this is the, do I hit the go again? The haka dance from the All Blacks, the rugby team in New Zealand. Okay, you get the idea. All right, so more seriously, this is Matt Walsh's view of what it means to be a man.
I think, well, it's kind of two different questions. There's what is a man or what is a woman, and the answer in the most literal biological sense is woman is adult human female, man's adult human male. And so I think that is not a complicated question. That's a very simple question. That's the what is. Maybe the question that you're driving at, and the thing that takes us deeper, is what does a man do? You know, I always say that I think a man is someone who's called to be a father. That's like the ultimate expression of you as a man, of your manhood is as a father. It's just that that can take on different forms. And for most men, like guys like you and I, our vocation to fatherhood takes the form of like the literal biological sense of being a father. You have kids. There are going to be other men who are called to other forms of fatherhood, like we talked about the priest and Rudy. That's a form of spiritual fatherhood, which fulfills that vocation as well. Every man is called, I think, to that kind of service. No man is called to live entirely for himself. Every man is called to serve.
Right. And I'm going to show one more clip, and this is a clip from the movie about Jackie Robinson. And where we're going to start is Branch Rickey, who's the owner of the Dodgers, was talking with Jackie Robinson about what to expect if he was part of their organization, and the fact that he would be discriminated against, he would be hated, people would yell at him, there would be a lot of bad things that would happen. So this is the clip right at that point.
You want a player who doesn't have the guts to fight back?
No. No. I want a player who's got the guts not to fight back. People aren't going to like this. They're going to do anything to get you to react. Echo a curse with a curse, and they'll hear only yours. Follow a blow with a blow, and they'll say the Negro lost his temper, that the Negro does not belong. Your enemy will be out in force, and you cannot meet him on his own low ground. We win with hitting, running, fielding, only that. We win if the world is convinced of two things: that you are a fine gentleman and a great baseball player. Like our Savior, you gotta have the guts to turn the other cheek. Can you do it?
I don't know if you could hear that. He said, like our Savior, you got to have the guts to turn the other cheek. So certainly a Christian view, a Christian manifestation of manhood. Now, since this whole lecture series is called Familiaris Consortio, it seemed like this was the appropriate time to bring in some of the teaching from Familiaris Consortio, and I've just bolded a few points here. Profound respect for the equal dignity of wife, manifesting charity that is both gentle and strong, that which Christ has for the church. Great guidance. Also here, and mainly at the bottom, when I talked about you can't have the libertine approach, you also can't have what Pope John Paul calls the machismo approach, the oppressive presence of a father, where there still prevails this phenomenon or a superiority of male prerogatives which humiliates women. That will inhibit the development of healthy family relationships. And then finally, the man also has to be involved in educating the children. This is not just a role for the women. So I think Pope John Paul the Great actually gives us pretty good prescription about what the role of man is in family. And then finally, Joe talked about the role of St. Joseph. Father Mike Schmitz was talking once about his mom, who sent him 2 statues, I think, or 2 pictures of Jesus with the Holy Family, or Joseph with the Holy Family. And in one, Joseph is kneeling down in reverence, and the other, he's standing next to him with a spear or a sword or something. I couldn't find both of those exactly, but his mom said to him, which one is better? Which one is more appropriate? And he said, my first thought was, I don't know what you mean. Which one do I like better? And she said, no, which one is more theologically accurate? And he said, then I realized she was really onto something. And the answer is both, right? So what is the role of Joseph? It is, as the picture on the left, to protect the family, to lead the family, to be there. But it is also the image on the right, to humble himself, to be there for the family as Joseph did for the Holy Family. So thank you very much.